Hey, 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 how's it going, Val?
What's going on, Dr. Tiff?
How has the day been for you?
I can say honestly, leading up to spring break,
Mhm.
um, today was great. Like, right before those holidays, like the kids get ramped up and anxious, and I when I say, and I don't want to jinx it, that we've just kind of been chill, like I'm proud of them. I'm
I
proud
love
of it.
it. I
Yeah,
love
it's been
it.
good. How about you?
Today was a little bit busy, but it was a good day. So Uriah is still on his spring break. This is the last week in spring break. So we're trying to get back into those go to bed on time habits. I let him stay up a little bit earlier, but he's had 3 weeks out. So on this last week, it's let's get back into the almost school routine. So that's what we're doing this week.
3 weeks.
He's
I
been
wouldn't
out
even know what
since
to do.
March 8th. Yeah. So they do 9 weeks on, 3 weeks off, 9 weeks on, 3 weeks off. So,
Ah, okay.
yes, so he has enjoyed it. We got a lot of education.com worksheets done over these 3 weeks. And, just because ain't open doesn't mean the learning stops. So
That's right.
he still has he works in the morning till noon, and then he can do his watch TV, play games, all that stuff for the rest of the day. But we're going to flex that brain muscle. Like, we can't go back to school knowing less than when we left school.
That is so good. Listen at me, the educator. I need to do better. I just be glad I'm out.
Yeah, we can just sit and watch YouTube all day. That's not going to work. So we are back for another Tuesday Talks.
Yeah.
And we had such a great episode last week that we didn't even get through all of our points for that talk. So
We do.
if you didn't join us last week, we were talking about special education services in public schools. And we covered a lot of ground last week, but we still had some really important parts and components to talk about. So we mentioned last week, special education is this kind of this umbrella term, and there are a lot of things that fall underneath that. And we kind of laid out the differences for IEPs versus 504 plans. So I know everybody watching tonight watched last week, and you were here, Val. So I want to give you a little pop quiz if you don't mind.
Oh man.
I'm
Here
putting
we go.
so
No
let's see.
judgment, okay, people? No judgment.
No notes, no notes. So tell me the difference between a 504 plan and an IEP.
So, because this is something that I really got confused about as a teacher. So, what I believe I learned is that an IEP, the student's disability has a major impact on their academic performance versus a 504. It doesn't necessarily require an impact on the performance, but their disability just requires some accommodations. Like, for example, I made the connection between someone having diabetes who may have to stop between testing to go to the bathroom or take care of their issues. That's a 504 situation versus an IEP situation. How'd I do?
You scored 100, A plus plus. That was excellent. And we did not rehearse that at all. That was on the spot. I sprung that on her. So kudos to you for
Wish
being
you
kudos to you for being a good listener last week. And I'll take some credit too for breaking it down. And that's what I think is so important. The term special ed and what all that encompasses can be really challenging to understand because there is a lot of information. And so being able to break it down so that people can just understand at its most foundational level what it is. And
right.
then you can, reach out to an education advocate if you have one in your area. There are some that work for pro bono, like no money. There are some that, of course, you're going to have to pay. But if you feel like you need that extra muscle to get your kid the services they need in school, you can reach out to an educational advocate because there are a lot of special ed laws that are in play that if you don't read the parental rights handbook that they give you at these meetings. You'll never know. So, picking up where we left off last time, we were kind of talking about what are some indicators or things that might be going on with your child that would say to you, hey, they may need some IEP services. So remember, IEP,
Mhm.
there's academic, there's some type of impact in the classroom, academically, socially, emotionally, or it could be impacting their communication as well. And they also have to have that disability category that they fall underneath. So some of the main indicators that your child may need IEP services or special ed services, they have difficulty learning. The curriculum, we talked about pacing guys a few weeks ago. The pace of learning is very quick in school, but you find that maybe they understood a concept one day, and then a couple days later, you feel like it's brand new to them again, or they have just been constantly struggling to keep up through the school year. And as the
Mhm.
school year has gone on, they've just gotten further and further behind because it's taking them so long to learn one concept before they can move on to the next one. And like you're the math genius here, the math middle school teacher. So if you don't learn step one, then building on that is almost impossible, right? So if you're learning,
Listen, I spend so much time like letting these kids know. And the kids that I've had in classes that are true identified with a disability that need an IEP, you guys, this stuff is real. Like it's not about putting a label on your kid. These kids will, just like you said, Tiffany, one day we're working on it, and most of the time that's a struggle, especially in a class like math. It's a struggle just to get it that one day, and you feel like you've made progress, and then they come back the very next day and they're not playing, like they're not kidding around. They really do not remember or have retained the progress we thought we made the day before. So yeah, that's definitely a major indicator.
yeah. So if you're seeing those types of things going on with your kids, that may be an indicator that you need to talk to the school about um, some support that they can give in the school, which may lead to being evaluated for special education services. Also, speech and language impairment falls under special education services as well. So if your child's having trouble communicating, if they're saying their certain sounds incorrectly, if they're not able to answer some basic questions about, what they've read in the story, or some comprehension type of activities are challenging for them, that could also be an indicator. If they're having trouble getting their thoughts down on the paper, so if they're asked to write a paragraph, or they're asked to write a multi-paragraph response to a writing prompt, and they just cannot get their thoughts from their mind, collect them together to put them down on paper, that could also be an indicator. um, Valerie mentioned that retaining information, that short term or working memory, so being able to hold this information in your mind, manipulate it, and then do something with it in a very short amount of time. If that's challenging on a consistent basis, then that could also be an indicator as well. Behavior is also a service that's covered under special education support in schools. So if your child has trouble paying attention, if they're having tantrums, if they're not communicating at all, if they're showing aggression, if they just seem to not be able to be in their seat and be
Oh,
attentive. Yes,
all over the
all over
place.
the place.
Yeah.
That could also be an indicator as well. And if your child has any hearing or vision impairments, and those are some of the more obvious ones, I think, like a hearing impairment, vision impairment, if there's some issue with communication, those are ones that kind of stand out. Um, is more of the subtle ones that, are they really having trouble learning, or is it just this particular subject? Is it just this particular concept? That's not something that you need to tease out yourself as the parent. You need to go to the school, to the professionals, and let them tease out where the struggle is happening. You can just notice that the struggle is present, and then you let the school tease out what may be causing it and what area that struggle is in.
Yeah. Yeah. Would you also say, like I'm just thinking about situations I've had, um, like even outside of school, like as a parent or a teacher, I know we talked about and like writing, or trying to communicate academic things. Would it also be helpful to observe them in other spaces and see if you see like a commonality? If they're having trouble, like for me, explaining something in math, for example, I also like to watch how they interact with their peers. Are they also displaying the same type of communication difficulty, just having, regular conversation with their friends and stuff?
Mhm.
Would those also be like good indicators to watch out for?
Definitely. The more information you can come to the school with, better. Because if you can say, hey, when he's with his friends, he's able to communicate his thoughts and interact with his friends quite easily. He loves science. He can explain an entire science project or experiment to you easy peasy. But when it comes to math or reading, you don't see those same skills in
Mhm.
those subject areas. That could be an indicator that maybe there needs to be some further investigation done to figure out what maybe is causing the struggle. So definitely those would be things. And I always like to point out that the schools can provide a lot of great services. So if your child has challenges with writing, the occupational therapy services in schools can help with that as well. And we're talking about usually the younger kiddos, but I've seen students all the way up through high school still getting occupational therapy services in school. Um, so it's just really important for you to be that advocate, like we talked about last week, and
Mhm.
really knowing your child and seeing what those challenges may be so that you can communicate that to the school so they have a good understanding of what your specific concerns are, to then see if that's also being observed in school too. Because if you just go and say, my kid's having a hard time, the next question you're going to be asked is, okay, so can you give some examples? What do you mean? You need to be able to share some things that are specific that you've noticed. It just helps
Mhm.
the conversation.
Yeah.
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 So I know there are lots of different perspectives on special ed. We kind of touched on this last week too. Um, what are some of if you've had involvement with parents at these meetings that maybe they are against this label being put on their kid? Because if they qualify for special education services, at the top of page one, it is going to say what the disability is.
Mhm.
Intellectual disability. Back when I started my career, in schools, mental retardation was still a categorization. And I remember a mom saying, absolutely not. You will not put that on my child's documents. Even though that's the area he qualified in, that label to her was not
Yeah.
something that she wanted to stick on her kid. And I totally understood
Okay.
it. Yeah. So have you run into any challenges in meetings that you attended before where parents kind of push back on the label piece of it?
Yeah. I remember a meeting where a parent was trying to, you know, get services. The child was displaying some aggressive behavior and things like that. And as we talked about some of the labels, the categories of disability, um, she was very verbal about not labeling something that would give a stigma of this is a bad child.
Gotcha.
Like the one that is about oppositional behavior.
Yeah,
Is that the
oppositional
right?
defiance disorder.
I'm still learning these, y'all. I'm still learning that oppositional defiance disorder. Okay. When as a teacher, when we see that, like in most cases, it puts us on high alert. I'm just gonna be honest. Because there's kind of that, again, teachers I feel like don't get enough training on it. And so we
Mhm.
can only kind of go by what we've heard or like our experiences. And that's one of those where I get it that a parent doesn't want a stigma put on their kid, because a lot of those labels carry a lot of weight, and a lot of times it's negative weight.
Definitely. Yeah, so as a parent, you have to figure out, How do you want to navigate that? Do you want to avoid services altogether? Because again, remember, in order to get an IEP, you have to have an identified disability. There are
Mhm.
different criteria that you need to meet for specific disabilities, and you have to have that. So if that's something that you are really stuck on, then I think you have to have a conversation with yourself, also with the school
Mhm.
team, to figure out how to navigate that because that has to be identified.
Yeah.
Um, I know there are some that feel like kids are set up to kind of need special ed services because of those expectations in classrooms. And I can think about younger kiddos because that's been the majority of my experience. So you have this little 5 year old, a new 5 year old, like fresh, just turned 5 in August, starting school for the first time in August and sitting at circle time on the carpet in the kindergarten classroom for 10, 15 minutes amongst a group of 25, 27 peers is
Mhm.
a lot. If they
Mhm.
haven't experienced preschool before that, they've just been home with parents, which I know a lot of parents who keep their kids home is more cost effective sometimes. And then when they're kindergarten, they send them to school. So it can appear like, okay, your child's having a hard time sitting and listening for long periods of time. So internalize that as a parent. What is the expectation of my 5 year old to sit and listen for 10 minutes or more on the carpet? Like there are some
Mhm.
that feel like for every year of age you are, that is what your average attention span should be. That's not scientifically researched, but that's just like something that's talked about. So if you're 5, then I expect for you to sit for 5 minutes. So we're asking them to go beyond what is developmentally appropriate and start asking yourself questions. If the school is coming to you saying, hey, your kid, we really have some concerns and we really want to test them. Remember, you know your kid better than
Mhm.
anybody. You are their strongest advocate. So while there are some instances where you need to seek services out, there are instances where schools will come to you and say, hey, we think your child needs to be evaluated because of X, Y, and Z. And if they're not able to provide those same details that we told you to share as examples,
Yep.
then I would dig further and ask more questions to make sure that we aren't identifying a disability that could just really be related to just typical child development as well.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely, like we've been saying, as a parent, you spend the most time with your kid. And so you know their tendencies better. You know them better than anyone else. And also, because they're your kid, you have this innate ability of judgment. So go with your gut. Like if you feel like there is something that's worth looking into, be an advocate and push for that. And if you feel like, no, your child, is fine at this point in their development, you don't have any concerns about it, then be their advocate and, ask questions or let them know that, well, we can watch this for a while and see, how my child progresses, but I want to give this more time. You definitely have that right as the parent to do that.
That's right. Ask for some interventions. And that's like a nice segue to our next point here, which is with underneath special education services, before you get to the point where your kid has an identified disability, you can try different interventions. You can try certain accommodations in the classroom to see if that helps mitigate some of the challenges that your child is having in school. So the team might get together and say, hey, for 6 weeks or for 9 weeks, we are going to try this specific intervention. Maybe it's a more one-on-one support with stat letter sounds for the younger kids. Maybe it's one more small group support for a certain math concept for some of the older kiddos. So they can try some interventions before to see, does this help, or are we giving these interventions and we really don't see any improvement? And I know as a teacher, having kids in your classroom with accommodations or specific interventions that need to be implemented, you are the person to do that as the general ed teacher because our special ed kiddos, the ones who may just be getting some interventions, are still in their regular general ed class. And so the teacher is responsible for tracking how that intervention is working, also any accommodations that a kid might have as well. So how does that go in a classroom when you have 25 plus students and maybe a handful of them are getting some type of intervention or IEP services?
IEP services, yeah. I mean, because it didn't used to be that way.
Mm,
It wasn't till some years ago that, I mean, it's been several years now, but when I first started teaching 18 years ago, the whole idea of inclusion was really, not that old. And so now the kids are, like the name says, they're included in the regular education class with the labeled regular education students. And so you have this new responsibility as a teacher that you didn't really have to worry about before, which is you're teaching everybody the concept, but now you have to be mindful of, you know, 6 to 7 kids in that, within that 20 something kid class, that they need these extra different things
mhm,
besides what you're giving everybody else. And I just really found that to be really hard to manage and to have to do. It took me a lot of brain energy, to be honest, to be constantly thinking about all those things, and then all the individual cases of just academic accommodations, not even to mention if there are behavior
mhm.
accommodations to add on top of that. And then let me not forget, because I'm finna get on a roll. I'm sorry. But like, so on top of those things, now I have to track the academic stuff and the behavior stuff within the time frame that I have the kids. And at my level, starting in middle school, I don't keep them all day. So that
Mm,
means I got to do it for that one class of 20 something kids. And then I have 3 more classes of 20 something kids that I have to do these things for. So it can become a lot. Fortunately, a lot of inclusion setups include an inclusion teacher.
mhm.
And I have to be honest and go ahead and toot the horn. I have an amazing inclusion co-teacher that I am working with this year. And I just thank God for her, because it's a whole lot. Okay. All right. I did it. I'm okay.
It is. It is a lot to keep up with because, you know, IEP stands for Individualized Education Plan. That means each kid has their own individual plan. This is not just a rubber stamp. Everybody who qualifies with this disability gets these services or these
No.
accommodations. So you could have 11 kids in your classroom receiving special education services, and they all have different accommodations. Maybe some
Yeah.
have shortened assignments. One might have a shortened test time. Maybe another one gets breaks. Another one needs to sit at the front of the classroom. You know, another one needs small group for this. Another one uses voice to text, so they don't have to write. Like it's so many that it can be very challenging to track. So if you have a child who is receiving special education services with an IEP or even a 504 plan, because remember, those can have accommodations as well. It really is important for you to, when they give you the copy of your 504 plan or your IEP, keep that copy. Make sure you know where it is so
Mhm.
that you can say, hey, teacher, I just want to make sure these accommodations are being put in place.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, your kid is one of many in the school. And even the best teacher with the best intentions can drop the ball sometimes. Again, you are your child's best advocate. So hold on to those documents, check in with the teachers, ask how are these accommodations being put into place? What does that look like during their day? So
Mhm.
that you are keeping yourself informed and you're also letting the teacher know I'm paying attention. Super, super important. So
Absolutely.
I know we talked about a lot over these past 2 episodes in terms of special education services, but really what we want parents to know are, first and foremost, we mentioned this multiple times tonight, be your child's advocate. Speak
Please.
up for your child. If
Absolutely.
We have a school full of teachers who entered the profession wanting to help kids. There is a lot that goes on every day that can prevent them from being the best version of their teacher selves, right? We talked about that all the episodes that we've done for Tuesday Talks. So leaving it in the hands of a well-intentioned teacher just sometimes might not be enough. And we all know that there are some quality differences in teachers as well. So you want to make sure that's like the nicest way I could put it. And I
That's
love
good.
it. But you have to be your child's advocate. You have to speak up for them as well.
You do. And I mean, we can't overemphasize this enough. And just from my personal experience with my older son, like I mentioned in the first episode, when I, as the parent, noticed what I felt like was some disfluency in his speech, I thought he was stuttering at an early age. And I did ask the director and bring up my concern. And the thing about that is, the person I asked was actually a family friend. So, I know she was well intentioned, and I know that as a family friend, I felt like I could trust it. And not to say that I couldn't, but again, years later in second grade, here we were getting an IEP for him because of, how much worse it had gotten. And so I always think about that time and think and tell others, like, please, if you have a gut feeling, then push for it. Be your child's best advocate.
Hmm. And if you reach out to your local school district or your child's school about your concerns, they should direct you to the person that you need to talk to, the department you need to talk to get the ball rolling on scheduling a meeting to address your concerns, to get input from the teacher as well. So if you feel like you're running into walls and nobody is really getting things moving, or you feel like sufficiently addressing your concerns, keep going up the chain of command.
Yeah.
Go to that district website, figure out who the special education coordinator is for the district. Hey, my kid is at Sunshine Middle School and I've been asking every week and nobody's getting back to me. Once you start going up the chain, things start moving pretty quickly. And you shouldn't have to do that, but that is an avenue to get things to happen quickly.
Yeah.
Another great idea is talking with your child's pediatrician. You're taking them for their well visits, you're taking them in for vaccinations, whatever. When they're at the pediatrician, share some concerns that you have. And the pediatrician can sometimes give you directions as well as how to access services in your district, especially for the younger ones that
Mhm.
aren't in school yet, that haven't started kindergarten yet. The pediatrician can be able to direct you to some avenues to access early intervention services as well. What are some
Right.
other ways
And
you can think of?
once you get the ball rolling, once you get the process started, just remember it does take time. So there's an assessment time that the kid has to go through, that has to be done. And that can take like 4 weeks of in and of itself, and then or up to 60 days for itself. And then once it's established that, okay, this child does qualify for IEP services, then an IEP has to be written, and now you're looking at an extra 30 days just for that to get done before actual interventions and accommodations can start in the classroom and for testing. So just be mindful of those time frames. Continue to ask questions during that time if you have any, but also just be patient with the process too.
Yeah. And I think also important to note is if you yourself speak another language, your first language is Spanish or French or whatever it is not English, the school district is required to provide a translator for you at these meetings. So make sure that that is happening. Sometimes they have someone in person there during the meetings. I've also used a called a translator line. So you get on speakerphone and you call in this translation line, and they will put someone on the phone, the parent speaks in their first language and the person on the phone will interpret it for the team as well. So if you yourself or a friend, are hesitant to go into the school because you're not confident in your English speaking or understanding abilities, the district
Mhm.
is required to provide you with a translator as well. So ask for that because that's something that they're required to do as well. And if you feel like you need an education advocate, we kind of touched on this a little bit, just a simple Google search, education advocate in my area. If you feel like the school is not hearing you, they're not responding, your child's already in services, and you feel like there's more that can be done, I keep asking for this and nothing's happening, get yourself an education advocate that will come to the school meetings with you and will speak on your behalf. They know education and special ed law.
Yeah.
They know what the schools are required to provide. And I have seen pretty amazing things happen when parents bring advocates to meetings. I know a student who, they've tried different interventions at school. She's getting special education services, and the parent was able to find an outside tutor and demonstrate that the child was making significant progress with that tutor outside of school. And the education advocate came to the meeting, and over a period of time, remember, you have to show that things aren't working. The parent and the educational advocate were able to show that the child was making more progress with the tutor than with any additional support at school. And that school has a school bus, a regular school bus that brings that child and that child alone to the tutoring center to get her services. And that was because they had an educational advocate there who knew.
And the system has to pay for it.
Dang right. System pays for that school to provide a school bus to take her to the tutoring after school 5 days a week. So
Mhm.
there are lots of different services. You just have to hip yourself to the game, basically. You can't play the game if you don't know the rules. So you need to educate yourself. You need to speak up on your child's behalf and make sure that they get the services that they need.
Yeah, what are some common ones that parents can, go into this process, knowing that are options?
As far as services,
Yeah.
yeah. So if you know that your child is in reading on grade level, that's like one right there, right out of the gate. That's really easy to notice. And if it's your first child and maybe you don't have that comparison to make, right? Because you don't have it's your first rodeo, you don't know. Ask friends that have kids similar ages, family members that have kids similar ages. Hey, what's your kid doing in school? What kind of books are they reading? So you can get some type of comparison to see if your kid is reading below grade level. Struggles with math, and math has so many layers. I mean, once you break down math into all of its concepts, it's, recognizing numbers, being the sequence numbers. I mean, all the different things. So if you're seeing consistent challenges there as well, there may be some issues there that need to be addressed through an evaluation to just tease out where the problem is. And again, those speech and language issues as well. If your child's stuttering, if they're having trouble expressing their thoughts, if they're saying sounds incorrectly. Um, I've worked with selective mutes before. They just choose not to speak. There are lots of different services that the school can provide, and some that we haven't even touched on here, like psychological services as well. If they need counseling, things like that. It can go beyond just your school counselor as well. So really use your school as a resource and ask the questions because you'll never know if you don't ask.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
So thanks for joining us tonight, everybody. I think we touched the surface on special ed. We covered it over 2 episodes, but it has deep roots. So reach out to your school district. Last week we shared those simple Google search terms, special
Mhm.
education services in my district. And if you have a child that's not in kindergarten yet, you can Google early intervention services in my district, and that will bring you up some options to just get you started in the right direction, talking to the right people.
Yeah. Yes. That is great information, Dr. Tiff.
Definitely share this episode with a friend, tag them so that they can come back and watch this. I think it's the great information, and the more we know, then the better we can do for our kids in school. All
All
right.
right.
Well, everybody have a good night. Thanks for joining us. And remember, we're here every Tuesday, 9 p.m. Eastern. See you next week.
Bye.